Mother relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. What is Carolyn Dubois' reaction to the official announcement of Taylor vs. Serrano 3 on Netflix, an all-women's card? I already know some of the fighters that are going to be fighting on that show, but I was told to keep a lid on it, and keep a lid on it is what I'm going to do. Carolyn reacted to the news by saying, now this is supporting women's boxing. If they want a co-main event fight, I'm here. Seemingly another dig at Eddie Hearn, because just the other day she had this and that to say about Eddie Hearn and how he's not really supporting the women while he's advocating for a fight between her and Beatrice Ferreira.
What do you mean he's not supporting the women?
A Twitter user that goes by the name Robert White asked, versus Beatrice? To which Carolyn responded, unification only. A Twitter user that goes by the name Jay Morris said fighting Beatrice would be a unification. LOL. I think he noticed the same thing I noticed, that as soon as Beatrice comes into the conversation, Carolyn clams up, because she didn't give a yes, an outright yes, to that recommendation that if you do want to box on that show, why not box Beatrice? The other day she said that Eddie Hearn wants to build Beatrice up off of her name, as if she's headlining her own shows or selling all of these tickets.
Give me a break.
You didn't have a problem with Eddie Hearn or the way he promotes when you were calling out Rhiannon Dixon. The energy is not the same when it comes to Beatrice. No, you didn't have a problem with Eddie Hearn's brand of promotion when you were calling out Terry Harper, but when it comes to Beatrice, you ain't got no problems with how Eddie promoted Rhiannon or how he promoted Terry, but when it comes to Beatrice, you want to turn into an activist. So bullshit. But she wants to participate on this show. She would like to box on the Taylor vs. Serrano undercard. To that, Amanda Serrano stated, I have a professional team that doesn't overlook anything. My fight card is full. No slots are available, and my training camp is set. I appreciate those reaching out, but one of the first things we do before making an announcement is putting everything in order. People are reaching out or commenting, put this one or that one on, but it's not the way cards and big events materialize. We collectively put it together before we announce it. Thank you. So that takes care of that. There is not an available slot for Carolyn Dubois to box on. And ideally, if she were going to box on that show, the most ideal fight to make would be the Beatrice Ferreira fight, which by now everybody knows on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Carolyn don't want no parts of that woman. She's trying to age her out. You look at the size and scale of the Taylor vs. Serrano trilogy, the interest that it's amassed, the money. And we didn't get to this point because of fighters like Carolyn. I can tell you that if they were as picky eaters as she is, we never would have got here, because she's the kind of fighter wants to wait a year and a day before she fights somebody with a pulse. And a part of what popularized women's boxing the last few years was that the women's fights happened in a timely fashion. Unlike the men's, the women were eager to get out there, even if it meant taking a risk, where she doesn't want to. She's the beneficiary of work that other women have already put in. And she is a lot more laxed in her career than Katie Taylor was when she turned pro. That's why she's turning her nose up at a unification match that is readily available, making excuses not to have it. She's got a lot of nerve, and it doesn't get said enough. Enough members of the media aren't putting her on the spot and asking her the tough questions while she struts around like she owns the place for battering cream puffs. It's not how we got here. It's not how we got to the point where a Netflix is willing to pay these two women an astronomical amount of money. It isn't. There's more work needs doing. Carolyn just doesn't want to do it. More and more people are becoming aware that she's no Katie Taylor. You don't want unifications as bad as she did when she was climbing up the ranks. My question is, if she's not going to fight Beatrice and she's not having any luck with Terry, who is she going to fight? Elsewhere in the world of boxing, in the men's super bantamweight division, 4-division champion Naoya Inoue says, I will be 32 in April. I don't feel any decline in my physical strength or performance yet, but I'm sure that someday that day will come. I have to plan my training and fights with that in mind. I want to close my fighting career when the time is right. I think I have about 3 years left, including this one. Naoya Inoue reiterated his plan to fight 4 times this year, saying January, May, September, and December. I think I can do this now because I'm at the top. If it becomes difficult for me, physically or due to age, I think that 3 or 4 fights a year would be too much. I'm supposed to fight MJ Akhmadaliev in September in Japan, and I'm really looking forward to it. When I fight against such strong fighters, I can bring out the best in myself and bring out the power I never imagined. I expect myself to show something unexpected in an instant.
Your best fights so far have been against Narvaez, Payano, Donaire rematch, and Fulton, all highly touted opponents. Is Akhmadaliev that good too? To which Inoue responded,
I think Akhmadaliev is a fighter of that level, a former champion, and a standout amateur before that.
It may sound strange to some that this is a fight that Inoue is looking forward to after so many narratives have been levied against him, in spite of his track record.
A lot of people got too comfortable too fast claiming that he was ducking MJ Akhmadaliev. I don't see what there is to duck. I don't see what there is to avoid. It's just a case of everybody can't get what they want when they want it. Inoue will get to MJ, but on his own time, not MJ's. MJ's not the one in the driver's seat. You don't become a champion across 4 weights, undisputed in 2, so that guys like MJ can tell you what to do.
You don't sit 50,000 Japanese in 50,000 seats to watch you box Luis Neri so that MJ can tell you what to do.
It's just not the way life works. You don't put in that much work so that other people can tell you what to do and when to do it. Though because MJ didn't seem all that high on Inoue's priority list, some chose to interpret that as apprehensiveness, as ducking, when if you've been watching this kid long enough, you'll know he doesn't duck anybody.
So it's looking like he's gonna fight Cardenas in May, then Akhmadaliev in September, in Tokyo or somewhere else. But those are the guys, those are the opponents.
That weekend that Inoue will be fighting will be a particularly busy weekend because you've got the Garcia versus Romero card that same weekend, the Canelo versus Skull card that same weekend, and of course, Inoue's fight.
All of which are going to give us a lot to talk about.
Now for the May show, Inoue will be returning to America after so many Americans requested that he fight here. Looks like he's about to do that, but it's not against a high-profile guy, which to me defeats the purpose. And I've always viewed those requests for Inoue to fight in America instead of his native Japan as veiled attempts to discredit him, his accomplishments, his audience, and his victories. That because it's happening in Japan as opposed to America, it doesn't mean as much. Americans don't watch the lower weights.
And there's not an abundance of high-profile American fighters in those divisions, so what would be the point? That if the fights are bigger for Inoue over there, why should he come over here?
Didn't make sense to me then, doesn't make sense to me now that he's doing it, that he will be fighting in Las Vegas against Cardenas.
I don't know, maybe that's some part of his top rank deal, that he has to have at least 1 fight in America to complete the deal. I don't know.
But he's doing it, and given the opponent, I don't think that will quite satisfy what the critics had in mind. Ramon Cardenas, somewhat unheralded at this weight, sports a professional record of 26 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 14 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 27 professional bouts. At this level, and having achieved so much already, Inoue's not in a position where he can overlook anybody.
It's a million guys like a Ramon Cardenas, upset-minded fighters that want to be the one to topple the undisputed champion dubbed the Monster.
And he cannot afford to look past any of them. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, a Twitter account that goes by the name Brunch Boxing suggests that the Beterbiev versus Bivol rematch only did an estimated 45,000 pay-per-view buys in the United States, and based on that, at least in America, it would have generated 1.17 million in pay-per-view revenue. That's not counting whatever it did outside of the United States, because remember, this was a largely international card. When you have 2 Russian nationals in the main event,
right,
couple of Brits, a German, a Chinaman, it's clear that your target audience is not an American one.
A New Zealander versus a guy from the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
A Twitter user that goes by the name Atlian Trader said, but everybody cared about this fight, quote unquote. It was the greatest card of all time. Turkey gave the fans what they wanted.
This is a big PBC guy, big Gervonta Davis fan.
That in and of itself tells you everything you need to know, that this is the kind of boxing fan, quote unquote, that is less concerned with international fighters and is more interested in remaining local. But I wonder if he actually bought Gervonta Davis's fight. When you're poo-pooing on a fight that only costs $25, I find it hard to believe you turned around and paid $80 for another one the following weekend. Quite honestly, I don't think this guy bought either of them.
Then what's he good for?
Not a goddamn thing. Another Twitter user that goes by the name Jordan400 said, I was told this card would sell more than Tank vs. Roach.
We don't know that it did. We don't know that it didn't. We don't even know what Tank vs. Roach sold. Those numbers haven't come in yet.
The jury's still out, but I find it very, very hard to believe that in this climate, a card that costed more than 3 times as much as the last Crescendo did better.
Because who bought it? You?
Reading comprehension is not the strong suit of individuals like these because you're only talking about the US pay-per-view buys for what was an international card. We don't know what the pay-per-view did in other markets, and being honest with you, I find it very hard to believe that this brunch boxing account would have inside intel on what it did because they are not a trusted news source. The brunch boxing account is tantamount to a couple of fans running a Twitter account. They're not pundits.
They're not journalists.
Another Twitter user that goes by the name Jesky reached out to boxing insider Rick Glacier saying, these cannot be the numbers, to which Rick responded, I don't know if it is. I would think it would have done a lot more than that just based on the DAZN subscribers, to which Jesky responded, yeah, I figured that in the United States alone, probably did upwards of 100,000 buys, never mind the rest of the world, because it was an excellent card, but you would never know it based on how some of these other guys are reacting.
Now to address the elephant in the room, do we even know if these numbers are genuine? Look at who they're coming from. These numbers ain't coming to us by way of a Mike Kopinger or a Dan Raphael.
A Julian Julianis, trusted news sources that actually have sources. I reiterate, brunch boxing is tantamount to a fan account with a blue tick. For all we know, they're just engagement farming. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they're just relaying the information they were given, but it's bad information. It's bad intel.
When you don't have to put your reputation on the line because you don't have one, you can report almost anything.
I wouldn't take just any set of numbers I come across on Twitter and run with it.
Because this card was not geared towards an American audience, it is possible that's what it did in America, but from this source, I just don't know. I don't trust it.
Maybe that account has an agenda and they're just propagating misinformation to put a negative light on what Turkey is doing. Maybe it's that way, or maybe it's not. Maybe they mean well, but they're getting bad intel.
Because who do they know at DAZN that would have relayed that information to them?
Who is it that their source claims to know? Because it's all about who you know.
Bottom line, I wouldn't believe it. Not coming from them.
Was quite intrigued by was, I think earlier last week, a tweet went out from TalkSport revealing that Ben Shalom had signed a bumper extension with Boxer. What can you tell us about, it was swiftly deleted, but what can you tell us about the potential of an extension, Ben?
Nothing yet, but we're at an exciting time in our cycle, and a lot of these fighters that ourselves, and not just me, Sky, have invested in, are finally coming to the forefront, are finally headlining shows, are finally getting to the interesting part of their careers, from Ben Whittaker to Adam Azim to Fraser Clark to Caroline Dubois to Lauren Price to Callum Simpson to Vidal Riley. These are fighters that have started with us and finally getting to the most exciting points of their career, and we're both heavily invested in, and there will be some news soon.
Looks to have momentarily answered some of the questions that have revolved around Boxer's future on the Sky Sports platform, as there has been widespread speculation that Sky might decide to bow out because they really can't keep up with the Joneses, not with Boxer alone. You will have noticed that Boxer's done less shows the last calendar year.
There was a question as to whether or not Sky Sports would continue in boxing once Ben Shalom's deal with them was up, as he was intended to fill the shoes that Matchroom left behind, and I can't say that he's done that.
Eddie Hearn called him weird
Last week, he didn't like that.
He had this and that to say about Eddie Hearn, saying, he can't relate to what I have been through. He can't relate to what I've had to put up with. He can't relate to the fact I've had to navigate it by myself and make mistakes in the public eye. For him to say that I am weird, he is weird.
Ben seems to be making it about something that it's not. In a very general sense, Ben is a weird guy. Not just talking about promotion, but the way that the guy carries himself, his demeanor, and the way that he talks. Like the cat that killed the canary. We in Sky, we're going to do great things for Lauren Price.
He's a very peculiar man, Ben Shalom, but it would seem that Sky Sports' partnership with him will continue. And that's good news for his fighters. That's good news for the Boxer stable. And the domestic boxing scene in the UK is Matchroom is a lot more international these days. They're not limited to just doing shows in the UK.
Doing shows all over the place, and how many of their fighters, how many of Frank Warren's fighters have been all tied up in big Saudi shows that perhaps Boxer can fill that void.
Provide something to the domestic UK boxing scene that may have been missing while so many UK fighters have been all tied up in Saudi shows. Maybe Ben can do that. He seems to have been talking about his journey, the ups and downs and mistakes.
He says that Eddie Hearn can't relate. I disagree, because Ben's undertaking with Sky Sports is not that different from Eddie's undertaking in America. It took years before Eddie Hearn made any kind of headway here in the United States.
Would seem like something similar applies to Ben Shalom.
But it was never going to be easy when you think about whose shoes he was attempting to fill and what he was up against. Not just Eddie Hearn and DAZN, but Frank Warren and TNT. These are established names, established promoters where you're the new kid on the block. They're not going to make it easy for you.
The same way the American promotional outfits didn't make it easy for Eddie Hearn when he endeavored into the U.S. market. It's an occupational hazard.
When you're the new kid on the block, it is.
It would be very easy to pile on Ben Shalom for all the mistakes he's made in the public eye, when the truth is, it was never going to be easy for him, because he's the new kid on the block going up against Hall of Fame promoter Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn. That's stiff competition for a guy who doesn't have a lot of time in.
Or a lot to work with.
Though it would seem that Sky Sports has elected to throw Ben a lifeline and continue their relationship.
Just have to wait for an official announcement for them to make it official.